Okay, so Gary, it really is good to see you again. I'm looking forward to talking with you about the latest report on the state of American men 2025 from Equimundo. And before we kind of get into the report, for those that don't know you and the work of Equimundo, if you could share a little bit about yourself, your work, and Equimundo, and then we'll get more specifically into the report.
Sure. Yeah. Well, thanks for having me again, Jed. And yeah, I'm Gary Barker. I'm the founder and CEO of Equimundo. I've been working in this space of healthy, equitable, caring manhood for a couple of decades, coming on probably three of them. We do research, program development, advocacy. We do this from a perspective that we're together with women's rights partners who have led a lot of the questioning of how do we make men so. And I'll say we a lot because I work with a team of 20 amazing people, and our research, our advocacy, all this stuff is, I'll take responsibility for my own mistakes, but I'll give them credit for all the successes.
Well, super. So, I've been working in the
Gonna
field
lower
of
this to
gen.
get the sun blast
Yeah.
through there. There we go.
I know. I get it from different ends, but
Yeah.
for me, I'm afternoon sun where I am in California. So, as you know, I've been working in the field of gender-specific medicine and
Yeah.
men's health for more than 50 years, and I found that Equimundo and the work that you've been doing over the years has been very influential in kind of adding to my research, my practice, and always found your work to be really, really helpful. This report, I know, is a series. You work and have information about men all over the world. This specific report about, state of American men has also built on other reports that you've done on
Yeah.
American men in the past. So I wonder if you could, say a little bit about this series of reports and, what are some of the, the specific findings that you found that were particularly significant?
Yeah. So we've been asking for, let's see, can I remember times pre-COVID? Can I remember years? Probably since 2006, 2007, we started our first round of research that we called the International Men and Gender Equality Study. Did that in 50 plus countries. Wasn't really a, multiple moments in time, but it led us to start asking questions like, what's up with men? Attitudes, life, relationships, fatherhood, violence, mental health, how much we believe in, in democracy as part of the recent round. And in the US, been doing this since 2016. First with our Man Box study, looking specifically at young men, 18 to 25, where are they on ideas about manhood, their own mental health? And then we created the first State of American Men study in 2023 and just repeated it the 2023. Well, the Man Box study was right as, months before Trump got elected. Then we had 23 that was during the Biden years, and now we have 25 with Trump back in office. And the US one is now framing, we're doing a global one called State of the World's Men. And there's about 15 countries that's happening in too. So it's both with partners in all those countries, and then we got the US specific. New paragraph, transition sentence. What did we find out now in the US? Man, it feels like, you want either a calming tea or a really strong whiskey to step into this conversation. It feels truly challenging. And this time we also asked of men and women, so we're able to compare, contrast, make sense, and see where things are the same. The biggest stuff that struck us and me, economic anxiety is off the charts. Pretty obvious, but we then look at how it just contributes to so many other stuff. And I suppose that centers really well with the fact that we're not well as in they're doing well, but well, conceptually, which is guys think, I got to be the provider. And if I'm not the provider, I can do lots of other amazing things, but that's like the number one thing I have to be. It's the number one thing women say men should be. and we have an economic world that feels really unstable. I like to, I was saying for a long time, yeah, someday AI is going to be, it's on the horizon. AI is here now. The latest jobs reports show that we're losing jobs to AI, women and men, but men faring even worse. Women are economically stressed too. It doesn't affect their mental health as much, but it definitely affects their mental health, or in the same way. It's better to put it that way. Economic anxiety there. This sense of nobody knows me and nobody cares about me. Jed, I know you're a therapist, I'm a developmental psychologist. Like, we know that the preconditions for flourishing is you have to feel seen and loved. If we're not that, we just do not flourish. And this is like, I wish this was not the developmental psychologist nightmare of guys are not feeling seen, known, heard. That, is what there's lots to dive into there, but that sense that it is not going okay for us at deep levels. And now we also affirm it's not going well for women. Women on average, but none of us are averages, are more likely to find help. They talk about it. They feel okay talking about it. Men are stuck in this version of manhood that says, fix yourself, pull yourself up by your bootstraps. Good luck with that, dude. And you're sold a version of, of kind of distorted stoicism online that says you can, you can mentalize your way out of this and work your, do enough workouts and work on yourself that somehow you can fix this stuff. When we know this is structural, this is systemic, you can't fix this by yourself. So pause, sip of my whiskey to take a deep breath, because that's the kind of perfect
Yeah.
storm that we found this year.
Well, I took a deep breath when I read this. I've read all your reports and they've all been, important and certainly the work I do. This one felt more personal maybe than many of the others. As you know, I've talked a bit about this in other contexts in my writing, but when I was 5 years old, so that's a long time ago, my father, midlife man who, typical man of the time and probably to some degree still true, felt increasingly depressed, anxious because he couldn't at the time support his family doing the work that he loved. And he eventually took an overdose of sleeping pills, was hospitalized in a mental hospital at the time. And I grew up wondering what happened to my father,
Yeah,
it would happen to me, and what I could do to, keep it from happening to other people.
yeah,
And so back then, so 75 years ago, we're talking, that
yeah,
role of breadwinner was critical. And what somewhat surprised me, and maybe you could talk a bit about what your findings are in your experience, that with all of the changes in, roles and women working in the world more, and it isn't just on men, yet this role, the breadwinner role, is still so crucial in the minds of so many men and women. And you maybe talk about that role and why it
yeah,
still is as important maybe now, or maybe to some degree more, given the economics of the present
yeah,
world, than it was back
yeah.
when my father went through this.
Yeah, I mean, thank you for sharing and being, brave enough and to talk about that. I mean, there's often a huge amount of both the tragedy and what it meant for your family, but also the shame about it, right? That's another layer of manhood in America, is that you don't talk about this stuff. Um, and so, yeah, thank you for modeling, how we talk publicly about this. I mean, I think what our data finds, and I think, you in your clinical practice and other spaces, we hear it from men as well, is that um, there's a lot of acceptance and a growing fluidity around what we can be as men. And our data finds that too, that men think, yeah, I should be a good friend. I should be able to stand up for women and women's rights issues. I should be an involved caregiver. I should, be a leader in my community that goes beyond, of being a builder in my community. There's all kinds of stuff that men are taking on as new things, but I don't, but the top of it continues to be provider. And it's kind of like all those things are good, but they're all secondary if I can't achieve that provider role. I was excited that we also did lots of interviews with men, different parts of the country, conservative, progressive, Trump voters, non-Trump voters, and finding pretty similar stuff, right? And finding unemployed dads who are finding meaning in being really, really involved caregivers and saying things like, I get to see my kids grow up in real time. I'm dropping them off in the morning. I'm doing some stuff for them in the middle of the day. I pick them up at the end of the day. I get to see them every day. Like, what a gift compared to perhaps what their own dads did. But they still talked about, if they weren't working, this like emptiness inside that is they're not doing all they think they need to be in the world. That the world holds them up to be that guy. We've also got that, the number of young men and some adult men, older men have told us this as well. There's a feeling of, I'm being assessed, right? We talk about it as your sexual market value. That you're being looked at on whatever dating app it is or whatever social media you're posting about your amazing life. That guys feeling probably definitely what women have felt for years, which is kind of being judged and ranked and all the rest. But young men talking about, now if there's a woman who's looking at me in a heterosexual relationship, she's not just comparing me to like, two other guys on the street. I'm compared to like the universe of successful men. So I think our social media world, where we make our lives and our identities in how do I present online, there's this version of manhood that's, hyper capitalist. I think was it the Canadian sociologist Goffman who said some years ago, that there was two perfect men, two real men in America, right? Because you had to, be reasonably athletic, heterosexual, be married, have two kids, have a nice car. Um, and basically Goffman said there's probably two men in America who live up to that. Now add to that, right? It's not just a little built, you're massively buffed. You got to have a big bank account. You've got to have a vacation travel life that looks like, Con Nast on steroids. Fill in the list of all you're expected to look like and be, and guys feeling like, man, how can I live up to that? But I'm not even allowed to say, because that's not allowed, right? The shame your father felt.
Yeah.
I'm not even allowed to say I can't live up to that. And so I think we see lots of guys just like, I'm turning away, which the other part that I didn't say, which like hit me in the gut, was the 40% of young men, the highest of any of in our sample, who said, I don't think anyone will ever fall in love with me. I felt this like, man, just where did
Yeah.
that, it just kept hitting around. I'm a, hopeless romantic and feel uh, uh, immensely lucky in life to be with a partner, 32 years, and to believe that there's more years, but every day is a new conquest. I just, I don't think you need that to be happy, but damn, it sure helps.
Yeah.
And to live a life remembered and shared. And, that one just like there was like rage, concern, rage. And then that one, it was like tears of this feeling of how many young men feel like you don't have to romanticize and go into finding a soulmate. You just have to like imagine that you can be a full human in a loving relationship is not too much to aspire for. And yet 40% of young men in America think that's never going to happen to them. That was a lot of digression because each of these are kind of
Yeah.
connected.
There's a
But
lot to
it's that
unpack in all of that.
there's a lot there of just how now, you know, big dash or semicolon here. Lots of guys are doing okay. And I think in the midst of, telling the stories of lots of guys who aren't, we also heard and talked to lots of guys who, in spite of, this kind of the system building this perfect storm, multiple reasons for this perfect storm, there's lots of guys who are coping well,
Yeah.
falling in love, feeling loved, being involved ads, finding new meaning in that, pushing back against, the harmful stuff they're seeing online, aware of what online lives mean to them. So as I present all that gloom, because it's pretty gloomy, it's also, important to say there's a lot of guys thriving and finding the flourishing lives we would want them to have.
Yeah. I'm glad you talked about both sides because I'm seeing the same thing. As a clinician, as a just a man in the world. I'm a father. My wife and I have been together 45 years. We have 6 grown children, 17 grandchildren, and 4 great-grandchildren. So we see multi-generations of
Yeah.
living. And, there are a lot of men and women that are doing well, but there are many that aren't. And you talk about the different levels of despair, discomfort, disconnection. And I know in the report you talk specifically about the economic worries are strongly linked to suicidal ideation. And my very personal
Yeah.
family, and not just my father, but this has been in other generations of children
Yep.
of mine who've reached a point because of a lot of things that they felt like life is not worth going on.
Yeah.
Now, when my father's generation, he was midlife, and we see it, as you know, clinically, and generally older men were more likely to die by suicide than younger men. But now you're seeing still older men, but now also, as you point out, at the younger ages. So
Yeah.
maybe talk a little bit about specifically the suicide findings, both in terms of
Sure.
actual suicides, and then the things that we know that can be precursors to suicide that affects everybody. And it obviously affects women, not just men, affects our children, affects multi-generations. And it's again, we don't want to talk about it.
Yeah.
It's part of the shame, the taboo. And I've been one that shared very openly about my own father, about our own healing journey, his and mine,
Yeah.
and my children and grandchildren. So talk a little more about what you've seen
Sure.
in the suicide part of your
Yeah,
study.
I mean, our data affirming what we know from CDC data, one, men are 3/4 of suicides, 2/3 to 3/4, depending on the trends, of suicides in the US. They've been increasing, at the population level um, within particularly young men. So we're seeing that increase. Used to be more white men. We're seeing an increase among men of color as well. And we found that very strong association. Those who felt perceived economic anxiety were 16 times higher, more likely to say they
Whoa.
thought about suicide in the past 2 weeks. For women, those who experienced economic anxiety were 7 times more likely to have thought about suicide in the past 2 weeks. So it happens for women too, but it was a factor of twice as much for men. We know that's not the only factor. There's lots of other stuff there, but there does feel a kind of intensity, our time horizons as humans now of, when things happen and how immediately we feel them and how we feel our lives are watched and measured against others for all the reasons I talked about how social media works for us. The expectations feel faster and more intense. Add all those things together. We do know from the data that depression and undiagnosed depression is often something we see. Do you have people around you that you can reach out to? A kind of perceived social support. So if you tell us no one really knows me, that's a factor. We know men's sense of loneliness, the lower number of friends they have compared to women, and the trend of fewer friends than in the past. So kind of, throw all that into it. I can talk about 2, let me call them case studies of young men that we interviewed along the way for this study and part of a book that's going to come out next year on the topic. One, a family of a boy who committed suicide, and another, a boy who attempted suicide. One of them was a 14-year-old when he attempted, one was a 17-year-old. So these are slightly younger than the ages we cover there, but I think they're telling. One, a young man who, playing around on social media, the stuff that sometimes guys do, a girl had been saying stuff about, guys in school, guys are stupid, they don't get this, they're all this, the kind of a standard discourse of men are bad.
Yeah.
And he reacted with his peer group trying to show off on Snapchat, said, we should, and he used a word for sexual assault. He basically said, we should rape Katie. Probably playing with the word, 14-year-old, aware of it, but also in a, well, serious thing. Snapchat normally goes away, but somebody took a screenshot and sent it on to the family of said girl. He felt horrible about it. He and his family went to apologize. They wouldn't allow him to apologize. They basically went to the police. Dad was a lawyer. Dad is a lawyer. Police come to his door. A couple of hours later, say, we're here to investigate this accusation of sexual assault. They called the word that he has posted the equivalent of sexual assault. One of the police officers is seen on camera saying, guys kill themselves over this.
Mm.
So take all this in. He is not formally charged, but put under investigation for sexual assault, given that long battery of tests that you do to look whether someone's got a tendency towards sexual violence and sexual predatory practices. That that is designed mostly for adults, but occasionally gets used for underage folk. This drags on for a very long time. He's got to change schools. He's called the rapist. It's basically slow death by character assassination online. The assessment comes back. He's not a sexual predator. The day it comes back, he was scrolling on a doom scrolling stuff, saw some pictures of people who'd killed themselves. He takes his own life.
Mm.
An extreme case, but also a story of kind of what are we doing now of young men's misconduct.
Right.
I think it's also a morality tale around we don't have much space for restorative conversations. When you might do something wrong, and that we've kind of put all harm into one basket. A friend of this young man, a few years later, he is accused falsely by a young woman of sexual assault. He was not even near where she said this happened. She had done this with other guys. He's looking online and seeing everybody, oh, here's another rapist amongst us. He's watching himself, be kind of killed online, so to speak. And because if you're a young person, and not even young so much anymore, so much of who you are is defined by how you're seen online. Took his parents' car, tried to crash it into a tree. Fortunately for him, cars are built these days to protect pretty well their passengers, and he was fine, but struggled with the shame about that, struggled with talking to his parents about it, and like, you don't understand what it means to be called that online. Really straight-laced guy who's like super leader and super, like, he cares about being dignified and honest and thoughtful. Tried to take his own life because of what was happening online. Two complex cases, lots of stuff there, but I share those because they tell us a bit about the important, or how so much young men and adult men these days, and women, are measuring who we are by how we're seen in the social space where we are online. Obviously, it connects to offline, but I bring those two up around, there's never one single factor, but we do have to understand the social lives of young people and of men in general, how much we feel we're stuck in this performance, kind of, we're all spin doctors of our own reality. And if we can't spin it in a way that feels positive, rescuing your identity online once it's been harmed, it's not easy in real life, and it seems to be really tough online to try to say, hey, hold on, folks, there's another piece of the story here. I am more than that.
Right.
And that's, and I, not to be able to ask for help. And so none of these are equivalent, but they're similar. What did your dad, and other men who feel, I'm not that provider, what can I do to save face? What happens when I lose face? So very real personal problems combined with this hyper vigilant social media, everything must be documented online all the time in real time. Lifestyle, I think, is, it's pretty clear the harm it has on mental health, and at the extreme ends of it, suicide ideation and suicide completion.
Yeah. Well, what you point out is so many important things. And, obviously my father was my father, so it's very personal to me.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of differences between what happened to men 75 years ago and what happens now, but there's some similarities. And so one of the things I want to share is that one of the aspects of my father's history, my father's he was both an actor in New York, came to California to get involved in the emerging TV and movie
Yeah.
industry, which he did. But he hit at a time where he was one of the blacklisted writers in Hollywood. For
Yep.
younger people, they may not remember the
I
McCarthy
do.
period,
Yes.
where this kind of uh, people in power had
Yeah.
a certain view of what should be right and what should be wrong, and many people were careers were ruined and their livelihoods was ended. And this was, his case. He couldn't find work. He couldn't find a job because he was on the list. And
Yeah.
I think you talk in uh, the report, and I think I got this quote right. He said, "Frustrated by economic anxieties, men and women support leaders who would tear it all down." And I think there's obviously some similarities in the kind of reactions to these kind of political and social views of people. And I wonder if you could talk about how this, even today, and
Yeah.
maybe now amplified in many ways, gets a way of supporting leaders, and obviously in the US and not
Yeah.
just in the US, that have
Yeah.
these kind of tendencies to destroy the system, pull it apart, and pull down people that are different than them.
Yeah. Yeah. In 23, we saw this in 25, and lots of other researchers looking at this, the Young Men's Research Project and others doing, kind of making sense of these elections where we saw just how much, less than college educated men, but all categories of people, women and men, that Trump won more votes, but really, really pronounced among um, the less than college educated men, which is the group that's done the worst in terms of their economic and employment prospects. Men's income in general is still higher than women because that average includes lots of men who get paid a lot of money. But men's, economic prospects are stagnant or declining among certain pockets of men, particularly lower income, and again, those with less than college education. So it's, that's always happened, that populists and right-wing populists could play on those fears and push you toward, vote for me and it's the fault of those others.
Right.
And the others fill in the blank. If it was women or immigrants or, but we can always blame somebody else. Never blame the capitalist, the hyper-capitalist system we live in. There's always a way to blame somebody else. So, right-wing populists have used that playbook forever. The issue is now they have algorithms and podcasters, and for a relatively, limited amount of money, the Trump administration figured out how online spaces work and how to play on the grievance, which was already there, and they just got to throw a little bit of gasoline on that fire, and it went, and there you go, right? You play the grievance card. And you basically say, don't look at me, one of the top 1% who is probably the problem, I will say is, blame those folk. And it plays well. And it even plays with Latino men and Latino women and men of color who voted, not to blame them by any means, but, because it was mostly white men who voted in the direction that we, percentage wise and numerically, obviously. But yeah, it becomes easy to say the system doesn't work for me. And the number of men and women we talk to, or men in particular for qualitatively in the interviews, feel like, hey, nobody's invested in me. What's the harm of tearing it all down? And young men in particular, college educated guys as well. Some we talked to, there was this, I don't believe all the conspiracies, but it feels so out of my control that why not try this?
Right.
And partly you wanted to go, well, it's, because a 5-year-old knows you don't just like, run into traffic to say, well, I don't know if I'm really going to get run over, or I don't, push my somebody else into traffic and say, oh, maybe they'll jump out of the way in time, or maybe it won't fall the way you think it will. You know, how do we build a sense that the stuff around you, now part of it, we need it. Part of it, they're right. We just haven't figured out in our political space to say, this is the stuff you need to tear down, and this is the stuff you need to keep, because this stuff keeps us well and alive, and
Yeah.
burning it all down as the way to burn down the stuff you don't agree with and don't like is a stupid solution, which will probably, I don't want to be right, but as you watch what's happening with tariffs and all the rest, you want to go, let's see a year from now when, you know, you don't have all these things in place, how that's going for you. As you try to bring all of us down with you. It's that is tough to put into conversations and get politicians to be able to say, we've got to make the case that we see you as underemployed, economically downwardly mobile men within our conversation about justice and equity that needs to look at longstanding ethnic-based inequalities in this country, but to also say that we can do an and there. I can look at those structural racial injustices in our country, unaddressed still, and I can see you
Right.
as a lower income, less than college educated white man who needs some help.
Right.
And I think that and equation, we are seeing what happens. And so our data shows us that it was close to 60% of young men in particular were like, I'll vote for, I'm okay with a leader who doesn't bother with elections and getting things, you know, approved by Congress. High percentage of women said it too. It was not low for them. So it does suggest just how helpless and out of control it
Right.
feels. And partly I lean in and say, I can hear you, because it really is on fire and AI is really coming for your jobs. And
Yeah.
the pace of change is really out of control. Partly you want to go, yeah, and 1% of the country owns 40% of the wealth. There's some tearing down to do. Just
Exactly.
with us, guys. Let's tear down the stuff that needs to be torn down, and let's look at the stuff that we need to be. And don't fall for the first, you know, authoritarian is who comes
Right.
across your screen.
Well, I think another thing that I think is paired, you know, we at least in the clinical world, and I think it's pretty well substantiated that the kind of things that lead to suicide, of in a sense acting in the pain, despair, the externalization of that, the other side of that is violence, external
Yeah.
violence. And I think again, I think I got this out of your report that you said that armed and ready is the current state of being for many men, meaning they own firearms and support the views of militias.
Yep.
Um, so maybe you could say a little bit more about the externalization, because I think everybody or more and more people agree, you know, violence is more and more happening. They may not personally see the suicides, but most of people are aware of levels of violence from road rage to militias to so on. So
Yeah.
what again did you find in the report, and what's your experience with what you've found around the externalization and the
Yeah.
violence that we're seeing?
Well, the more than a third of men who say they support the goals of militias, and the nearly 7% who say they belong to them. Now we don't know if that 7% means I'm, I go to active training and I've got, weapons under my bed and I'm ready to go. Or if I just, I post on a Reddit thread and I call myself a member. So we're not, completely sure what that means, but in and of itself, that's pretty frightening of how many folks say a version that would be basically the state's, is worthless. And the only way that we can do this is by taking up arms and figuring out ways that we take state military power into our own hands, and here we go. It feels like a couple of those dystopic movies that we've, or TV shows that we've all seen. But we also saw that TV show that was called January 6th, where 2,000 like not firearm armed men, but armed with other stuff, attacked our
Yeah.
capital. And the instigator of that is now our, head of state, has not been held legally responsible for it. And so you've got it's a how do we step in that conversation with men and say, no, there are other ways to resolve this? So I think that fits in. I'll go back even earlier than the 75 years of your dad, but if you want to look at sort of Germany in the 1920s or
Yeah.
and I mean it not because that's the facile one that we always compare to of what does it look like at the birth of a fascist movement, but it is economic insecurity, men who don't feel they have purpose, somebody who comes along and says, I got purpose for you, and this is what it looks like. And then, we vote said person in, and then we watch and we're going to blame somebody else for what's going on. It's different, it's slightly different flavors of the same ice cream, if that's a useful metaphor,
Yeah.
that's being offered. And I think we've got to step in with our fear and our panic. And if we just sort of point and go, they're all bad, and you got to stop them from doing that bad stuff, is not going to do it. I think we've got to step in with we see you've got some reasonable grievances. We think you're going the wrong way with them, but let's come together and talk about what are better ways to look at what are reasonable grievances distorted by and again, the speed with which and the way that algorithms and the guys making a profit under online by spewing the worst stuff, right? The ridiculous way that algorithms work toward the more outrageous, the more followers. And that's where that's where you accumulate the check that comes to you from, we don't even use checks anymore. The deposit that comes to you in your Venmo from YouTube every month is how
Yeah.
much rage. Not always. There's some great voices out there who are saying positive and sensible things, who are also getting a Venmo deposit from YouTube every month, but they're not as big as the harmful stuff. I'm not sure if that was coherent. That was kind of the multiple way that I
Well,
see this stuff
it's so big
piling
and so,
on. Yeah.
yeah, it's so complex. And I think it's easy to recognize and empathize with things are really bad
Yeah.
and to recognize that though your report and doesn't take, an in-depth look at your report, although I think it illuminates not only the problem, but it also starts speaking to, well, what we can do to
Yeah.
make things better
Yep.
because it's easy. And I think, I've certainly felt it and many others do too, that, oh my God, I mean, we're screwed. I mean, there's just no way out. It's all going down. It's all, coming apart. We might as well just either eat, drink, and be merry and go down with the ship or,
Yeah.
just, despair or just forget about it. But there are really some very specific things that your report says and also leads to that says, those of us that have decided, I'm just not going to give up. I'm not going to leave the
Yeah.
country. In my case,
Yep.
this is where I'm going to live. This is where I'm going to do my best to make things better. So, talk a little bit about in the time we have, left today, a bit more about the positive of
Yeah.
what you see, what your report says, and where do we go from here?
Yeah. I mean, one obvious positive is there's a lot more conversation about boys and men these days.
Yeah,
And I think we're getting a little bit beyond a zero-sum game conversation that we can talk about both and talk about why the well-being of men matters for women and the well-being of women matters for men. And so, one is we're paying attention. That's a great start. The other, I think the targeting that I think needs to be there, and I'll go back to it, is young men in the kind of under 30 non-college goers. I think that's where we see the highest risk of self-harm, the most likely to support ideas of tearing it all down. Not only, and that's not about blaming young men, it's about saying they deserve an economically fair chance. And I think we can do stuff that acknowledges women in the same age group are not doing well either. But we may need to do an extra nudge with men. We can point to things like your great state, or I can say mine. I was also born in California. Governor Newsom came out with a statement last week. It's got a lot of the stuff we need, acknowledging men's mental health. I think there's a relational piece of it that I would add to it, which is we've seen again and again that simply offering programming and options for young men doesn't necessarily get them in the door, or adult men as well. We seem to need an extra nudge. We heard again and again from guys that they need somebody that they feel has their back. And that's when they decide to go take advantage of a job program, a job training program, a volunteer position. There is, because of all this social isolation and disconnection, guys seem to need an extra boost to get out of their house. I remembered one young man we talked to when he got to university. He was feeling very lonely in the great state of California again. And he said this one piece of advice. I was like, I just felt he lived on his own. I can't remember if he transferred, maybe he transferred. He was feeling kind of lost. And he said he remembered one of his friends who said, whatever you do, don't sit in your apartment by yourself. Get up and get out. Even if you don't know what you're going to do when you get out, just go out, say hello to people you see on the street, figure out what's interesting about your neighborhood. Don't sit there by yourself. Like that's the kind of support that I think lots of young men need. Just like, come on, dude, come with me. The world can be a dangerous place, but it's pretty friendly if you try. And there's lots of stuff out here for you. But we can't assume that in your loneliness or isolation in your apartment, you're going to find it. We got to go find you. We're trying approaches online where we're also using online spaces to advertise, using the language that, that it's accessible to young men to say, come try that group that's over here. Come know about that. But even if you're staying online for much of your life, here's some more positive spaces you can connect to. So we've got to go find young men where they are. We've got to acknowledge that they need to feel cared for before they're going to come to the spaces, and feel okay about that extra boost they're going to need there. The other piece that we leaned into was care and caregiving. We got a lot of questions in the survey. We're listening to it a lot. Men are doing more of the hands-on care work than before. We will and continue to say, women are doing a greater portion of the mental load. The average, it's still not equal. Yes, but I'm going to look at the glass half full, which is that men are doing more of this. They're getting more of their identity from it. Let's lean into it. They want the same care policies that women want. Let's involve them in being activists for this. Come support this. You care about it. Let's help you do more of it. And third, I'd say that the mental health space, and kind of related to my first one, we just need a lot more spaces where men connect in the offline world. Things like the 3F groups, faith, fitness, and fellowship. And sometimes on the left, we'll look and go, well, they're not really, showing up as full allies for gender equality. Let them show up just to practice with their care muscles.
Yeah.
And practice social relations again and just get good at that. And next week or the month after, a couple of months after that, we can talk about other stuff of, being better versions of better men, better humans. But for now, let's just, we need to help men practice that. And it can't sound clinical, and it can't sound preachy, and it can't sound like we're here to teach you how to be a good man. It's
Right.
got to be inviting. It's got to be their language. It's got to be more young men talking to other young men. No offense to those of us with beautiful white hair. But we got to acknowledge what the stuff we're going to be good at, and the young men who are out there doing some of that. And then the other is just to there's a lot of, again, I want to end on this part. There's a lot of guys who are figuring it out, full of love for particularly their friends, right? Just like they're doing what good
Yeah.
manhood and good humanity is about. They care about their mothers and their sisters and a world being fair. They often look what they see online with it's kind of like the circus. I know you can't really twist your leg around your head like that. Most people can't, but it's kind of entertaining, isn't it? It's kind of the new, the new freak show in some ways. I don't really think Mr. I'm copying words they said of like, yeah, Mr. Beast is kind of stupid, but it's kind of fun to watch, isn't it? So they, and they can see through the Andrew Tate, bullshit. They have good bullshit detectors. Uh,
Yeah.
we've got to step in and support that and say, I know you can see through this. I know you're a good human in there. How do we help sort of strip away that? And I want to end on that. Like, if we only have this gloom about men, there's a lot to be very, very concerned about. But stepping in with this, I do believe by being empathetic toward men, we get them to be empathetic and to care about social justice for all of us. Um, that's I'm going to go with that as my cause and my theory of change. And I'm going to, I'm going to stake that as where we try to go
Yeah.
as an organization and what I'm trying to do.
Well, I'm totally with you on all of that, and I think just to kind of pull it together, you've made a
Yeah.
couple of points that I just want to underline. One is that I speak again personally. I've got sons and daughters. I've got grandsons and granddaughters. I have great grandsons and great granddaughters. And I think whether you have children or not, I think we all have a recognition that we want the best for our children.
Yeah.
And that if you have children in your family and you happen to have boys and girls, you know that in some way, when the boys aren't doing well, it's going to affect the girls and
Yeah.
it's going to
Yeah.
affect everybody. If the girls aren't doing well, it affects the boys.
Yep.
If your wife's not doing well. So this idea that we're talking today about men and boys
Yeah.
and men, and the report is about men, but it really is, and just want to remind our listeners, our viewers, that this is about us all. This isn't
Yeah.
just about men and boys, but by surfacing the areas where boys and men are not doing well in the same way Richard Reeves talks a lot about what changed for women when we
Yeah.
focused on, getting women into the professions that they had not been
Yep.
in. And now it's time not to decrease that, but to get men into the sides of the heel professions
Yeah.
and the other
Yep.
professions that men have not been part of.
Yep.
So I think the positivity is that there's a recognition that men need things both for themselves and to be better men and better people in the world.
Yep.
And that together, that's the only way we're going to do it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Together, we can make the world a better place. And that's why I'm
Indeed.
I'm always excited to hear what's new with Equimundo, and always good to talk with you. And I hope we can continue the dialogue because
Absolutely.
these are times that both, I think, I describe men as both the canaries in the coal mine in some way,
Yeah.
reminding us of some real difficulties, but coming together, not just as men, but then as men and women and all the different variations of humanity, plus the human connection to the rest of the world,
Yeah.
because humanity isn't going to survive very long if we don't get back in balance with the rest of the natural world. All of
Indeed.
us together can make a difference, and I really appreciate you, Gary, and your organization and the various connections that you have. So let's keep the dialogue going. And is there anything kind of final you'd like to, say by wrapping up today?
No, I think your summary was right on, and the kind of what our personal stake in this and our personal awareness of our human ecosystem, that the throw off the balance here and it ripples through. And I sometimes think about the kind of where do we need to go with our sons, and I have the immense joy of being a girl dad, and just got to do some travel with her. That we have some trips that we do as father-daughter trips, and absolutely adore spending time with her. And one of the things that we talk about, or now she's my she is my curator of science fiction TV and books that I kind of got her hooked on. Um, and she's now taken that to, to other levels. But I bring that up because there was so much when she was young and still is. She part of her childhood was Brazil, part in the US. And there were so many things to point to of like, you can be anything you want to be as a girl, right? You can, you know, dolls and tutus in the morning, and then we're playing astronauts and thinking about Captain Janeway on Voyager in the afternoon, right? Of kind of all that stuff for her. And I don't think we've had a similar conversation about boys. We sort of talked about what we don't want, right? Of what we want to throw out, but we haven't given what gives you the positive identity. And so what is it that we're filling in? And I think that, and some days I panic about that because we keep just telling the men the stuff not to do. But
Right.
I think there's a whole new opportunity and a space to say, let's be really creative. We're doing some stuff with Hollywood and like how to tell better stories. And I think there's a hunger for boys to feel like this is what I can aspire to be.
Yeah.
And it's got to be more three-dimensional than Marvel heroes. Although some of the Marvel heroes are getting a bit more
Yeah.
dimensional, but they have powers that most of the rest of us don't. So we got to get a little down to earth
Right.
on the new hero stories for boys of like what is it that we want to fill in? Like enough with the you can't be this. What is it that you can be?
Right.
And I think there's tremendous insights from what we did with girls that should help us think about that.
Right.
So I lean on that toward, if somebody asks, well, what are you positive about in the world? Well, I'm kind of pretty clear that feminism made the world a better place, and that was, decades of kick-ass women making things happen. So
Yeah.
I'm going to lean into, young women pushing for change and the young men who I feel are getting it. So
Yeah.
there's good
Well,
stuff
the
out
world needs us.
there. Yes,
They're waiting. The women are waiting for the
indeed.
guys, and together we can really make a difference.
Yeah, and I think there's a few guys, kind of hearing the call and doing some amazing stuff. So whenever I get really, really down, like sit with a group of 10 to 12-year-olds and there's there's a pulse of life and we can make this different. And so I'm gonna lean into that as my get me through the day.
Super. Well, to be continued. I look forward to talking with you more. And at least for now, we'll send this recording to the 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 record people, and we will move on. And looking forward to getting this out in the world.
All right. Thanks, Jed, for including me. And I really appreciate your energy and view and take on this, your optimism, and I'm always happy to talk more.
Good. We will do it.
All right.